Chris, are you with us?
I am here, Senator. Good morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Have you been following this hearing this morning at all?
I was able to join for about the last half an hour of the commissioner's testimony. Yes.
Okay. Well, the floor is yours. I don't know whether we have the Attorney General's request to the U.S. Department of Labor in our file, but we'll get it and we'll post it.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So the floor is yours. And I understand the Attorney General wanted to be here, but is in DC today. We hope to have him, and we've contacted him to come in on the 12th of October.
Yes, thank you very much for that invitation, both for today and for a meeting in a couple of weeks. He sends his regrets, and I'm very happy to be here to testify before the committee. For the record, my name is Christopher Curtis. I'm the Chief of the Public Protection Division at the Office of the Attorney General. We handle a wide range of consumer matters and civil rights matters for Vermonters. I want to thank the committee for your time today and for inviting the discussion about what, to be sure, is a challenging topic. The purpose of my testimony today is to share with you the both the substance and the context for the Attorney General's letter to the U.S. Department of Labor. When the Attorney General became aware that there was a problem with issuance of the $25 to Vermonters who receive unemployment benefits, he wanted to act quickly to really send a message that during the course of the pandemic, we know that benefits of this type can be a lifeline to Vermonters. And so in considering the U.S. Department of Labor's position, I think he wanted to act swiftly to request reconsideration in light of legislative intent and to reach out constructively and positively to convey a message that we stand ready to work with their office, with our federal and state partners at the respective departments of labor, and certainly with our friends and colleagues in the legislature to find out what, if any, options may be available to the state to get these benefits out the door as soon as possible. And if I might, if you'll indulge me, I did want to make a comment about the pandemic generally. Some of us are meeting remotely today, and Vermonters from all across the state have been operating under very difficult conditions over the last year and a half to 2 years as this pandemic has rippled through Vermont communities. And that has major and significant impacts on the workplace, on schools, on people's ability to meet their basic needs. And when you step back and think about it, a central purpose of unemployment benefits, it's not just a financial life raft for the individual. The construction of unemployment funds was specifically designed to include and consider that work readiness and an ability to return to work in any meaningful way is predicated in some sense to be able to meet those basic necessities of life, whether it's your housing or medication that you might need, transportation to get to and from work. If you are dislocated from employment, the benefit is there to ensure that you are ready, in fact, to return to work as soon as reasonably practicable. So the benefits themselves they're not a handout. There are conditions associated with them. And they really go to employees who have become unemployed through no fault of their own and who want and desire a return to work. So a very critical part of our social safety net, but one that benefits employers as much as dislocated employees, because it means that an employee is ready to return to work. So I did want to just make that point very briefly. So on September 22nd, the Attorney General issued a letter requesting reconsideration in light of the plain language of the statute and legislative intent. The reason for that is because the USDOL's letter and the interpretation that it relied upon was based on the notion, essentially a combination of the word supplemental that was used in the statute itself and what appears to be a sort of practical consideration in terms of like how the money would flow through the system. And the USDOL basically issued its decision saying that that is not feasible, at least insofar as the funds come from the unemployment fund. Could come from some other fund, but not from the unemployment fund. And when the Attorney General looked at the language, it was quite clear that the legislature intended these monies to flow to an individual, any individual, qualified individual who benefited from the program, and that this essentially was an enhanced benefit amount. And the term supplemental in this context is almost incidental to the purpose for which the funds are established. The U.S. Department of Labor, correctly points out that the term additional compensation under federal law creates the conflict on which it based its decision. And we just thought it made sense to reach out to the department, find out if in fact it might reconsider, and based on its technical expertise, are there other tools available to the state of Vermont, whether it be a waiver, whether it be technical assistance, whether it be any number of other strategies that might be employed to help the state get where it wants to go, which is to make sure that these funds go to Vermonters who are qualified and eligible. So that was the purpose and the context. The Attorney General has invited a conversation or a meeting with the U.S. Department of Labor to discuss the matter. And I know he would certainly welcome that. And we certainly appreciate the responsiveness with which the legislature is taking up this important topic, and hope that there can be some common ground and rapid resolution to this snafu among the administration, lawmakers, and our friends and partners in the federal government. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, or if I can add any other illumination to this, I'd be happy to do that.
Chris, do you know, and I may ask our legislative counsel this question as well, what the average length of receipt of benefits is for a typical UI claimant? I remember it being somewhere between 10 and 14 weeks.
It's a great question. I haven't looked at that data in some time, so I think that would best come from the administration or the department in terms of looking at the average.
Yeah, it's far less than the 27.
Yeah, where I'm going with that is I did sort of a back of the napkin calculation of how many Vermonters ultimately could benefit from this $25, and it's hundreds of thousands of Vermonters over the course of the $100 million. The other question I have, you've asked for reconsideration. Is there a formal process there? Is there a standing issue, or is this just fairly loose that anybody can essentially go ask and speak about this, and that the U.S. Department of Labor has the ability within a certain period of time to modify their decision?
Well, it's something of a novel process for us to be engaged in, and I certainly would hope and expect that to the extent that the department wanted some kind of formal response from us, that they would so signal. We wanted to, I think the Attorney General just simply wanted to reach out, act quickly, request reconsideration on the facts as we understand them, and look for an appropriate response. This is unlike it's unlike a sort of more formal administrative hearing process, in the sense that there was no expression in the USDOL's letter about you must respond within a certain number of days in order to effectively appeal this determination, et cetera. So there was no notice by the department of a certain time within which a response needed to issue. But I do note that frequently in administrative proceedings, you might have 30 days to respond or something along those lines. And I know the department's letter issued September 1. The Attorney General responded, I think, September 22nd. So our hope and expectation is that the department will respond quickly and let us know its position, and we'll look forward to receiving that response.
Chris, I take it you've had no phone call or follow up from the USDOL since you got, I mean, that was an emailed letter, I assume, so it got there pretty instantly, right?
We mailed the, we have not heard from the Department of Labor as yet. We mailed the letter. I did not have a personal email address for the administrator, but again, I expect a prompt response, and I suspect we will hear something soon.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping.
Chris, could you talk a little bit about, my understanding is that the Attorney General's office represents typically departments in state government. Here you're put out a letter sort of contrary to what they have suggested the legislative intent is. Is that unusual, or how does that work?
I think it's just a simple request to reconsider all the facts and circumstances, and I don't view this as any particular conflict. I think this is just a matter of trying to illuminate the question that's before the department, and essentially trying to convey that we're hopeful that there's a resolution, and that this can meet the needs of both the department, lawmakers, and more importantly, the affected Vermonters who are hoping and expecting this benefit.
If there was litigation in this area and you're on record saying you believe the legislative intent to be something different than what the department, would you probably try and find independent counsel for the department? And could you still continue to pursue your advocacy for a different result?
I think it's premature to speculate about that. And really, this is just a letter requesting a look at all the options.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we look forward to hearing directly from the Attorney General on the 12th. I know he had particular concerns, and maybe just go elaborate a little bit about not minimizing the value of this added benefit to recipients. Do you want to touch upon that?
Yeah, I think I testified about that briefly, and I think that's probably something that you all, as representatives of your respective constituencies, can speak to perhaps more eloquently. But I do know that for unemployed Vermonters, this is not, benefit amounts that are received. They really go to meet the essentials, and it's in part to ensure that those individuals have a form of income, and it's in part designed to ensure that employers have a pool of applicants and prospective employees who are ready, in fact, to return to work. So for all those reasons, unemployment benefits are certainly an essential part of our economic picture.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, Senator Brock?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Damien, can you join us for just a touch? Good morning. Thank you for your Herculean efforts on this unexpected development. So I just want to see if you have any knowledge about the process at this point. Are there avenues legally, politically, whatever, to change course from if we did nothing, just the fact that the non-conformist letter is out there and the benefits are not going to be paid, I take it, on October 6th. What are the options here as you see them?
Good morning. For the record, Damian Leonard, Legislative Counsel. So there are several different options available at this point. I may not cover all of them, but I'll try to do my best to cover what's out there. So the first two have already been discussed this morning. First, implementing the $25 as a weekly benefit amount. At this point, given the department's interpretation, our State Department of Labor's interpretation, and what they've told us about the mainframe computer, I would say it's highly unlikely that could occur by October 6th, and probably unlikely that it could occur anywhere in the near term, given the complications with the mainframe. But that is one option. It would likely require a legislative change to clarify the statute now that they've made an interpretation that this is intended to be an FPUC style supplemental benefit that comes in after the regular weekly benefit amount is calculated. The next option is to identify an alternative funding source. The USDOL in its letters has indicated that this would be in conformance if we paid the money out of a separate funding source. It's not clear the extent to which we could use UI administrative dollars to do that. So you may also need to identify funding for administration and implementation.
That was confusing in their letters, wasn't it?
It was, their statements were not entirely clear on that. They seem to indicate that it's possible. But one other thing to keep in mind with that, and I can't speak for the department, but in their past testimony, particularly in front of JITOC, the Joint Information Technology Committee, they've indicated that the administrative dollars they get from USDOL are not increasing at a rate necessary to cover the costs of what the department needs. So they may also not have additional administrative funding sitting around that could be reallocated to this. So that's something else. Even if the USDOL says, yes, you can use those dollars may already be spent on the existing administrative needs of the program. But again, I can't speak to that in detail. It's just something to keep in mind as a question if that's something you pursue.
Senator Rodson.
Yes.
Question as to whether or not any other type of COVID funding could be used for this purpose, or if there's been any discussion or analysis of that.
I have not performed an analysis of that. It is possible that could be done. I also don't know what the status of those funds are. They may already be spoken for and allocated to other programs, but it would need to be non-UI trust fund dollars. So there are.
It would obviously, though, presumably only be in a short run, because those typically have limited timeframes attached to them.
Right. So this would probably be in the way you would probably set this up if we were doing it legislatively would be to create a special fund. And then each year it would get a legislative appropriation, and likely you'd have carry forward with the interest staying in the fund and so forth, to try to minimize the amount that you need to appropriate each year. But even just setting that up and setting up the IT and administrative procedures to get that integrated and out the door, and make sure that we're not overdrawing on the UI trust fund, and that we're reimbursing it properly and so forth, so that the money goes out and it's integrated seamlessly at the end for claimants. That, you know, that's more than just the paragraph that we write in the statute.
So there, just to follow up on that, Senator Brock, I can get you a copy of this letter, but there was a letter put out by Janet Yellen and Mike Walsh, who's the Secretary of Labor, encouraging states. I think they were looking more towards states with high unemployment rates, but there was no restriction on it, to use ARPA dollars to supplement unemployment benefits. And you're right, you can only use those for a couple of years, but you know, that might be one possibility to bridge the time until we can figure out a solution here that everybody can agree to and get money out the door. Because in that situation, it's not trust fund dollars, and so all the concerns about the mainframe and all that stuff go away, according to the department, and just give us some sort of bridge money. I think that would be a possibility.
Well, I think realistically, though, based on what I know about the mainframe system, that is not going to be resolved in the time frame before the COVID fund ability runs out.
Well,
It's
yeah,
going to be
I mean,
longer than that.
That's a sad state.
That is sad, because
I mean,
We can't
that's
do
four
any
more years.
policy.
That's based on the
Okay.
department's own analysis and proposal for updating the system.
even though they're getting this huge
We've
influx of money.
got a 1 year infusion of money now that the Joint IT Oversight Committee has approved. That's a planning phase. And then it would be three, as I recall, it would be 3 to 4 years after that. And we haven't even started effectively the first phase yet. So it's not going to be in time before the COVID money runs out.
That's something we might want to look at, but as far as you know, there would be no restriction other than the time frame on using COVID funds to meet the concerns of the USDOL.
I have not analyzed that question, so I'm not comfortable saying on the record that there's no restriction that I know of, because I simply don't know at this point. But I believe it could be possible. I just need to analyze that, because
What was, I know we have plenty of money that the governor set in reserve for future years. And we asked the question, I haven't got, maybe the answers are in my inbox, but I asked the department, I think you know the answer, how much per month would it cost to cover these claimants? At this point, how many claimants do we have that would receive the $25?
so, and I'm reading from the testimony the department submitted to the committee today. So currently, as of the week ending September 18th, there were 4,219 ongoing claims. Let's see.
So it's like $100,000 a week, right?
Yeah,
Right.
so doing the math from there, $25 times that, yeah, you're looking at about 100,000 a week. But I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I believe Joyce Manchester from JFO has also prepared some rough estimates. So that might be something that the committee would want to get from Joyce or Matt Barowitz from the department at its next meeting. But yeah, the estimates there, though, also they cover the cost of benefits going out, not the cost of administration.
Right.
So then there's also that potential added cost, because if there are no UI administrative dollars to cover it, you may need to appropriate additional funds.
Are you familiar with the letter I'm talking about from Janet Yellen? And
I'm not.
Okay. Let me
I've
see if I
read
can
that.
let me see if I can get that put in the record.
Sure. So are there
Yeah, I guess I
additional
was-
questions?
yeah.
I think we were talking about
options.
options. The other option that you just talked about at length with Chris Curtis from the AG's office is this whole possibility of reconsideration. It's certainly a possibility. I don't have experience though with that process and what the negotiations look like. That's probably something that Director Wood from the department could provide you with, or maybe Dirk Anderson, the general counsel, or the commissioner could provide you with more about their experience in dealing with that. The other piece that's out there is once you do have a formal determination of nonconformance, there's always the possibility of a legal battle. I think that's unlikely at this point, given that unless we have some sort of reason to think that there was a misinterpretation of the law around the use or the payment of a supplemental benefit not being permissible with UI trust fund dollars. If we agree with the USDOL position that is not a permissible use of UI trust fund dollars, then a legal challenge to the nonconformance opinion, given that given that the existing interpretation from our department is that it was intended to be an FPUC style supplemental benefit paid after the weekly benefit is calculated. If there is no disagreement that that's not permitted under the federal UI law, then I think a legal challenge going forward there would be fruitless.
But would the legal challenge be that was not the legislative intent, that the overriding legislative intent was to pay it,
You could make that argument.
and that people didn't know that this was looming, and to focus just on the word rather than the overall intent? At least there's a colorable argument on both sides. That's what I was trying to say. And so it's, I mean, I agree practically. I don't know who's going to challenge that at this point, but if the case ever went to court, I don't know that it's a slam dunk either way.
You could make that argument. I think it would be difficult for our Department of Labor to say reverse its interpretation and then file a legal challenge based on that. That's a difficult position to go into if they're going
Say
to.
that again?
It would be difficult for our state Department of Labor to reverse its interpretation of how the benefit was meant to be paid out, and then base their legal challenge on that. I think that's a difficult position to argue from. I think that there can be arguments about legislative intent, but I think at this point what we're dealing with is a state agency that has responsibility for interpreting the law and administering the law. They provided that interpretation to the federal agency, and then the federal agency has said, based on that, we think you're out of nonconformance. So that it's a difficult position. Now they're at that point. I don't think you can really, I mean, you could certainly try, but I think it's a difficult place to backtrack from.
Is when you say reconsideration is a possibility, you're saying that USDOL, despite what they've heard, does have the power to reconsider, and what is the process?
So I think at this point, we don't have we have a formal notice from the USDOL
Right.
asking our state Department of Labor to, one, not implement the law as it's written,
Right.
based on that interpretation,
Right.
because doing so would place them in nonconformance, and two, work with the legislature to either clarify the law or to put it in conformance, or to just strike the language that has placed us in potential non-conformance here. So there are really three options there. One is a clarification that places us in conformance. The other is leaving the language as is, but providing that separate funding stream, which would also place us in conformance. And then the third option is repealing that language from the standpoint here based on that notice of non-conformance. I think then when we're talking about reconsideration here, I think what the AG is essentially asking is saying, hey, we think you didn't consider all the facts in issuing that notice. Would you reconsider and possibly rescind that notice and issue a new one? I don't know the extent to which that occurs at the federal level, but I think that's the stage we're at, is asking them to potentially rescind that.
And do you know whether, I assume you don't know the answer as to whether that can happen after the appeal period or it has to be before the appeal period?
So there's a time each year, and it's either early October, early November, when the Secretary of Labor is supposed to determine whether everyone's in conformance for the coming year. And this is for purposes of your administrative funding and the tax credits to employers that we receive as a factor of being in conformance at the state level.
Say that again, you're saying there's a time of year, October or November, where the Secretary of Labor confirms whether the state is in conformance or not? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so the Secretary of Labor each year is supposed to review legislation that's passed and any changes to the underlying law or the administration of the program, and then make a determination each fall to basically say, yes, you've remained in conformance. That's what this whole process going forward is, where when we do a legislative change, they analyze it and they provide notice to the state if they think there's an issue. And so this is new ground for me, but it's not necessarily something that's unheard of across the country. I think typically what happens with states is you don't implement and fix it in the coming legislative session, or maybe you have one of these ongoing conversations that Director Wood was describing this morning around some of the procedural changes the department implemented to deal with the enormous influx of claims at the beginning of the pandemic. And sometimes you come to a successful resolution, and sometimes the U.S. Department of Labor, like with this able and available issue, says, no, you have to go back and reevaluate all of those claims and then address that going forward. And so, and I don't have familiarity with that process, but I think what the AG's office has essentially asked for is for more discussion about whether this non-conformance exists. I don't know the extent to which an effort by a third party like the AG's office in this case has been successful in other states where they run into a similar issue.
I've heard that in terms of non-conformance, the power of the US DOL is referred to as a nuclear option, where they discontinue administrative support or other stuff. They could pull all your funding, and that has either never happened in the history of the program or
I can't speak to that.
So I was going to ask you whether you know that if the state were to implement this over the objection of USDOL, what are the risks and what is the chances of further negotiations producing a solution that is not risky to provide? I assume you don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, I can tell you what the potential risks are. I can't speak to our chances
how it works
or how the back and forth is going to go. I don't have any actual experience with that process. Right. And again, Director Wood or Commissioner Harrington would probably be a better.
Okay, why don't we hold that question for them? I understand. I know the fact that they could pull all of your funding. So
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's another option that we could work with the Joint Fiscal Committee and come up, once we have a notion of the number of people affected, and at least come up with a stopgap measure and fund through ARPA dollars, the benefit through January, February, until we could take legislative action. And actually, so that those impacted won't be impacted necessarily in terms of, would be benefit, would receive the benefit, and that we can work out, that gives us time to reconsider. It gives us time to work with USDOL and our own department to come up with a solution that everyone can live with, and that can go into the next 15, 17 years. What is that? Would that possibly be an option? Because it's not very much money. It would be for whole, it's.
It in the grand scheme of $100 million, it's not a huge portion of that, but my concern would be that this may exceed the JFC's authority to reallocate funds when the legislature is not in session.
But it's not reallocating funds. These are funds we determined this is independent of where the pocket comes from. This is a value we voted on and passed, and the governor signed.
Did not appropriate
That's
separate funds for that. So
Right.
appropriating, we're talking about,
no, it's
we're talking
a
about,
couple $1 million through.
a few $1 million here, just to get us to that point between implementation, possibly paying back benefits to October 6th, and then paying benefits going forward until we can get a legislative solution in place. And I think we're talking about a few $1 million, and I don't know all the rules governing the Joint Fiscal Committee, but I would be very concerned that this exceeds their authority to allocate funds without approval of the full legislature. I know during the first year of the pandemic, we provided express authority
Right.
for the reallocation of large portions of CARES Act dollars during the interim, but it was directed towards very specific programs. So it said basically, this money will revert and then JFC can send it over to X program or Y program at that time. But that was done very specifically in the big bill.
Right.
And in this case, I'm not sure that we have that authority. This would be something where I might suggest that you hear from Joint Fiscal, the Joint Fiscal Office, on whether that authority exists.
Because as we know, our committee also worked with appropriations and worked with the rest of the legislature to appropriate tens of millions of dollars that have yet to be spent on other economic recovery efforts. And it's just, we know that there's money there that has not been spent, that has been appropriated, that is work related and is economic development money. Anyway, it's something maybe.
It's clear that what was appropriated was for specific purposes.
exactly.
And this money that we're talking about was not appropriated. It
Yeah.
want to be part of the unemployment fund. And so I would echo that concern as to whether or not that using JFC is the appropriate thing to do.
I'm not sure JFC can take that big an action at this point. Usually something like this is handled through the budget adjustment act.
Can the governor do anything?
I don't think the governor has this broad authority to reallocate funds in this case either, that I'm aware of. So again, typically the governor's authority is fairly circumscribed, and there is some authority, but it's for smaller amounts of dollars, not multiple millions of dollars.
I was reading about the homelessness thing, and I was asking myself, this amount of money was appropriated up until a certain month, and all of a sudden another month got freed up. I had to say, how does that happen?
Well, he must, we have Brittany here. I assume that there's discretionary money somewhere for some of those actions, because there are emergency actions that need to be funded.
Right, but you're talking about providing discretion to say, well, this grant program hasn't been successful in getting money out the door. So I'm going to take money from that program that the legislature said they want to spend that money on and directed me to spend that money on. And now I'm going to redirect it over
Yeah,
here.
no,
And that's getting into,
I get that.
yeah.
I'm just
getting
trying to-
into an area where now you're starting to have an issue with,
Yeah,
you know, the sort of appropriation versus with the housing. We said spend it on housing. And if the management allows for that spending to increase or.
no, I'm just trying to figure out how we don't impact the potential beneficiaries to this, and while we have an opportunity to work out a solution, that's all.
Right.
And it would be great if we could do that.
Yep, we're trying.
So I think
Thank
your
you.
next witnesses are coming in.
Yeah,
I hear them binging in. It's a new legislative sound in
Is that what
these
that is?
hybrid meetings.
Yeah, we're at 11:30.
We took a break already, so we're gonna move right into Joan Goldstein and David Hall. David's gonna be zooming in. Thank you, David.
Thank you for your time. I'll see you this afternoon.
Damien, thanks.
Is Becca on? Or
Senator Ballard had to step off the meeting really quick in Zoom, and then Zoom, we have Joan Goldstein, David Hall, and Doug Hopper.
so, and when will Keisha reappear?
I didn't hear you say that.
When will Senator Rahm reappear? You know?
I believe she's traveling here. She's got her video up, but she's in the Zoom following the meeting.
Okay. And when do we expect Senator Ballard to come back? Do we know?
I don't know. She messaged that she had to step away really.
I can
She
ask.
didn't-
I
She
can
didn't
ask
talk
her.
about her return.
We're gonna go forward anyhow. We have a quorum, and we have Joan, who also I think has some. Hi, Joan. Did you have some complications or sickness that I
No,
read
she's
about?
sick.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes.
She froze.
No, I have a cold.
And you're
I
frozen.
could hear, I'm getting a notice that my internet connection is unstable. Great. Bear with me. Let me just see what I could do.
Yes.
Am I unfrozen or am I still frozen?
Yes, no, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Good
All
morning.
right.
It's 11:30.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, thank you for being here. We want to talk about, good morning, David.
Hi, David.
We're just getting started. Want to talk about the undersubscription of the bridge funding, economic recovery bridge funding. What your assessment of the program is, what the latest numbers are, what is going on here in terms of why there's so little take up. If you recall, I think we had two chunks of 10 million and then $20 million. The governor wanted the full $50 million. And we have a very low take-up rate. And I know we were concerned with trying to target the money to those businesses that were truly in need. There are some that say we can't be that surgical. We gotta get the money out the door. As we get 2 years into this, the argument of getting money out the door is starting to get a little less urgent. So I've actually had contact with the governor's office saying that we want to work together to preserve this pot of money for economic recovery plans that are targeted, and whether it's this one or some additional one to get to that point. We also have on the agenda David Hall and Doug Hopper. The auditor, I think, feels strongly that we need to put boundaries around this money. Can't be just based on reductions in revenue alone. And he's written a report, I think it was on the middle pot of money, not this one, but I think his comments probably will overlap onto this these GAP grants. So with that introduction, Joan, the floor is yours. Tell us what you'd like us to know. I think at least from where I sit, I like the money targeted, but I'd like the money preserved for economic recovery in a targeted fashion.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Senator and members of the committee. We, so far, I know that we met with you all probably a month ago, and I think we were just shy of $1 million awarded. And so as of yesterday, I think it's 1.9 million, so a little bit more. It's a trickle compared to last year. In total, about 79 awards. There's been one award in every county except Essex County. But, you know, I think to answer the question why, I mean, it is a difficult application. It's difficult on a number of levels. One is there are requirements to have a 2020 tax loss. And then on top of that, we are adding back in previous work. And on top of that, it's limited to the amount of that loss. So there are a significant number of constraints. In order to operationalize the program, it took a lot to actually get this processed and into an application. It's difficult for the applicants to apply, and it's difficult for the reviewers to review them. It is extremely time consuming. I don't know what we would have done if there were even more applicants. But having said all that, you know, quite a few applications are not submitted. We've had like 1,000 applications people start and haven't submitted. At the time we met with you all, we promised to do a survey. We did do that. A survey went out to 800 at the time, and just about 20 came back. 20 survey responses came back. So it's really hard to glean the information other than what we heard from those 20, but also the, like, for example, the lodging properties and people who have said, look, you know, back when the governor originally asked for this, it was January. It was in advance of when all the other monies were released. And during the course of the legislative session, this program was designed to be extremely vigilant and full of constraints about who can and cannot get the funds. So, you know, some people have not filed their 2020 taxes yet. There's a cadre are saying, please give us till the end of the year to fill in our application. There are others that may not have had a 2020 tax loss, but when they take into consideration their profit and loss over the period of time from the beginning of COVID up until like the end of April, which is when we had asked people for data, and we add back in their other you know, awards, they don't have a loss any longer. So, you know, there are a myriad of ways. There are some people who don't have a 2020 tax loss, but when you add back in their P&L over the extended period of COVID, they are at a loss, but because the statute says they need a 2020 tax loss, they're ineligible. So there are myriad of answers, right? There's not one thing to say. There are a few people who, you know, we've had about 120 applications ineligible. They don't meet the criteria, or they were eligible for the program, but when we did all the calculations about adding this back in or that back in, the award amount ends up being zero due to the net positive profit and loss statement. So we did everything as instructed. And what is a result is that people are not getting the help that they need. That's kind of the summation. You know, doing this on net is something that, I guess the premise is that if you made a profit of $1, you're still ineligible. So, you know, that is very, very extreme. That's a very tough situation. Somebody who normally makes a profit, let's say of $100,000, just because they made a net income of $1, you know, they're ineligible. So it's extremely strict. The other thing, some of the lodging properties were busy over the summer and they don't have enough staff, so they're working in their own businesses and they're saying, please give us some more time. After foliage season, they will apply. I mean, having said all of that, we are getting a trickle in. It's not as if, if we're getting 5 applications a week, we're still helping 5 businesses, presumably. So, we did do a fair amount of outreach and publicity and webinars, and I think we're going to do another webinar again, just so that folks know. Some of the pleas have been that the maximum grant of 150K isn't helpful for some of the larger lodging properties, as an example. The other is that the fixed expenses that are allowable under this do not include things like business loans. It's just mortgage. So there was some fallout or pushback about that. I think I've covered, all of the sort of myriad reasons.
One of the things you told us last time was that you might start seeing some more in October for people who are on extension.
Correct. Yeah, some people have said they don't have the right documentation or that they have a different fiscal year. And so as a result, their 2020 returns haven't been filed. So they're just hoping that this doesn't go away before they have a chance to apply.
So, excuse me one second, Lieutenant Clarkson. So one thought that comes to mind, and I know this will be subject to a lot more discussion, instead of saying tax loss, if we can say net operating delta, so if you made $100,000 in one year and the next year, because of COVID, you only made $50,000, that would soften the program somewhat, but it would still consider reduced operating expenses. We were concerned, as you know, and I have been all along, that just doing it based on straight revenue reduction doesn't take into consideration that people may have had a dramatic reduction in their expenses. So would that be sort of a middle ground, something like that?
Perhaps. I mean, there's no guarantee that it's going to, any change that we make, there's no guarantee that it's going to create a new influx of applications. And again, it would take additional analysis to determine how much of this was operating loss as opposed to any other type of loss. So, the more intricate we make it, the more time it'll take. Like, just to give frame of reference, the costs associated with changing the application system are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, we need to be very sure that that's going to make the difference. And I think I would urge you to listen to the constituents. I think what we're hearing is that people want it based on revenue, not on, because there is not a dollar for dollar. Each reduction in revenue does not lead to a reduction in expenses. There are lots of sunk costs. So I don't have a good answer for you because I'm, having been through this, we feel that it's hard for us to recommend a particular course of action that would result possibly in more applications. I think we really would need to listen to those who are having a hard time. I mean, we're working with a business that's not going to get help and is going to have a hard time just, gearing up for the winter because they were profitable, but, they still had a loss. I mean, it's not a loss in terms of tax loss. You're right. It would be a loss from one year versus the next year. But we would have to redo the entire program.
So your response to my question was, well, people still want just a reduction in revenue to be covered because sometimes they don't see a reduction in costs. That doesn't, in my mind, that answer doesn't target the money. Couldn't we say for those people that have a reduction in revenue and don't have a reduction in costs, you can look at that and give them more money. But for those people who have a reduction in revenue and have no expenses, let's say their restaurant shut down, that you're not going to give them dollar for dollar their revenue loss. So I guess what I'm assuming that you support the idea of, when you're not the fifth floor, but you support the idea of keeping this money in economic development and economic recovery for business. So what we need from you is some ideas starting now, so we're ready for the session, of how we can tweak this program to make it better and still target it and not necessarily give money out to people who don't have, need as much as just the old unmet need factor of whatever you lost dollar for dollar will replace up to a maximum. So I want to work with you, and the sooner you can start fleshing out modifications to this statute, the sooner we can roll up our sleeves and get that and keep working on the budgeters to keep this money in your shop.
Right.
Yeah, I would say I think we need to, we should probably get a better sense of what's going on out there. I mean, I think this notion of, that if we change it to operating loss, that everything's going to be okay. I think we really want to figure out what are our goals here?
Right.
What are our goals? Yes, we want to target it, but the people that we purportedly targeted it for are not being able to get help from this. So I feel like we need to really sample them, survey them. What is going to help them get through? And, we went to you in January with our recommendation, and what came out of it was very, 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 very different. So we're a bit hesitant at this point. I think we want to understand from you what you want to accomplish. Last year it was about get the money out, and this year it was about be careful. Yeah, so we're careful, and then this is the result. 3.0 is not as utilized.
Okay, so I think what we want, you're saying, you need to hear from the businesses as to why they didn't apply or what the problem with the program and what their immediate needs are. But it seems to me that you're in a much better position to sample those people. And I thought you did some sort of sampling of these businesses, but maybe we need more evidence of what the problem is. I know Senator Clarkson went to a lodging association meeting and you were there and they were upset about this. I mean, but that's sort of anecdotal. It would be nice for the experts here to come up with a couple of solutions to improve this program, because it's clearly not, we wanted more targeting, but perhaps, as you say, we over-targeted, and we need to look at that. Otherwise, there are a lot of other places in economic development we can put this money, as opposed to, recovery grants. But I think before we do that, I think we should look at, is there a way that people could feel comfortable with getting some of the money still into recovery grants? So as we move out of COVID, there's less and less COVID pressure on businesses. So.
Okay. So we did target the first group, the first amount of money to businesses that had gotten nothing. And I guess one of my questions, because I'm just not hearing clearly, that crowd that we thought was going to be a fairly significant number of people. We had budgeted 10 million for that group of people who'd gotten no help. That they never materialized, right? Is that what I understand, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, part of this is timing. So again, remember, let's go back to January. There were people who didn't get help, and it was before the new additional PPP and EIDL was announced. So that's why we called it bridge. It was like to bridge those people over. There were new businesses, et cetera. So yeah, it was much smaller, and we still prioritize those who didn't receive anything, but we're much more hard pressed now to find people who didn't receive anything.
Right,
because
exactly,
of the
okay.
additional help that came down the pike. So, you know, it is a question of timing. Remember, we launched this right after the emergency order was
We
you know,
understand,
released.
and we were hoping to
You
get
know.
this done right away, and we
Right.
didn't. And it, you know, the legislative process, as you know, took us
Right.
longer than we were expecting.
I mean, I think
Joan-
it's a different problem now. I think what's happening is
Yeah.
the emergency order was lifted, people went back to work, you know, the businesses reopened and now can't find employees. So the focus was on how do we operate without employees? How do we get employees? And,
So
you know,
that's
that was their first order of business rather than spending a day, you know, filling out an application. I'm not saying it would take a day, but it's a lot. You know, it's a tough, there are some tough bars in this. So,
right, but you have would you be willing to share the responses of the 20 surveys that did come in? Because the recommendation, we have that.
yeah, I mean, there are, and I mentioned all of them in my opening, right? Some say they didn't have time to finish. They had not filed their 2020 taxes,
Right.
or they didn't have a tax loss in 2020, or they didn't have a net loss through the COVID period, like going beyond December of 2020. Some of the smaller ones didn't want to complete it because it's so onerous and they weren't 100% sure they're going to be eligible. So it was a question of weighing out, you know, is the ROI for this worth it when they're working in their business and they don't have a CFO or something.
So, but Joan, in addition to the workforce challenge, which is very clear, and we hear that loud and clear, there are still a few businesses that we are very clear on, and particularly in lodging, that are still struggling. And I think the key is to target how we can help that very specific group. I mean, in some ways, that's the group that are still have huge unmet need. And how we figure out how to do that, to me, is sort of the key. Right? I mean, isn't that the group you're still hearing mostly from that are still in fairly dire shape?
Yes. And they did ask for the things that I had mentioned. They asked for increase in the maximum award to widen the fixed expenses that were eligible to be reimbursed to include business loans, not to have such a restrictive list of fixed expenses.
Right.
You know, and then overall, the plea was about revenue, you know, the reduction in revenue.
And look at production and revenue. Right.
Yeah, because they still have to pay their mortgages. You know, it doesn't matter if someone's in their room or not. There are carrying charges. So if that is the target group, then I think that's their recommendation. I don't know if they've written to you separately, but.
Okay, so do you think a further survey or outreach is needed, or are you in a position where you sort of have identified the problems over these last half a year, and maybe new applications coming for people on extension? Are you able to write us a memo saying what varying, I don't want necessarily one recommendation, but like a potpourri of ideas of how we can improve this program? And I'm not saying we will. We might say, you know, this ship has sailed and there's better places to put money into economic development than recovery grants at this point. But assuming we want to salvage the economic recovery grant, which really is, if you look at the governor's proposal, has $49 million left to give out. You know, I like your ideas, I guess that's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And what can we do within now? I mean, what can we do without further legislation? What can we do within the parameters of this that we've set up that could actually move immediately for the crowd that are still in need? I guess I'd love to not have to wait till January.
Yeah, right. And I guess Joan, you probably have covered this base already, but I assume the word is out on this program. It's not an unknown program, and chambers of commerce and all those other organizations know to tell their business community that this money is available. It's not a question of not knowing about it. You're saying it's either they can't meet the standards or it's too difficult to apply and those kinds of things. I mean, maybe if there's administrative money that's allowable under this program, has it all been used to help people apply and walk them through it as doing an extra hand-holding to get it out the door? I don't know, but I would like to, one of the reasons why we're having these two hearings on some, both the UI, this, and the bill that was vetoed are really sort of live issues that at the very least we want to hit the ground running on in January. So anything you can do to help us there. One last question before, unless you have things to add, is that there's been a lot of press lately with the auditor's report on, what was that, the second tranche of money or the first tranche of money? I can't remember.
First and second.
First and second. Do those kinds of issues that I know you have ongoing and disagreements with the auditor on, do they apply to this program as well?
So when you say those types of things, I think the auditor's view is that we should do it on net income, and that the 3.0 would probably be the recommendation. So I don't know if that's what you mean, that are these present in 3.0. I think to refresh everyone's memory, in 1.0, we base the award on 10% of 2019 revenue.
What's that word you're using, Joan? One?
I'm sorry, in the first version, in the first rollout of the recovery grant, we based the award on 10% of 2019 revenue, right? And that was for people who either experienced a 50% loss in any 1 month or a 75% loss. Then the next round was unmet need as defined by change in revenue from March through September of 2020 as opposed to 2019. So they're very, very different than what we're doing now with 3.0. There are some things pointed out in the auditor's report that we will be following up on in terms of tax standing, because we do require good tax standing. We'll be working with tax to determine whether or not these folks are in good tax standing, and if not, to work out a payment plan. We'll do the same for those on Secretary of State. The one sort of clarification I'd like to just set the record straight is that there is no way for us to know that businesses were better off in 2020 than in 2019, since the 1.0 and the second version we did not have full year financials. So I don't know how we can make that representation that they were better off than in 2019. So that feels very misleading. The other thing is that even if they were more profitable in 2020, that was not the end of the COVID disaster, right? So COVID's not over. You know, the period of time to measure was really about the COVID disaster, COVID impact. There are people still feeling COVID impact. So that is also, I think, a bit misleading. The feds are not requiring us to reclaim funds for people who made out better than they had expected. I mean, this is part of the vagaries of doing disaster assistance while the disaster is still unfolding. And it's not a requirement from AOA as well. The Chief Fiscal Recovery Officer, you know, he identifies risks. And as we know, that it was a risk factor, just that you can't 100% mitigate all risks. So yes, we do see that that's been, you know, repeated in the press, but we do want to clarify that there's nothing untoward or non-compliant about the way we transacted. I think what it does show is that the state auditor's office prefers that we do everything based on net income, because if a business makes a profit, somehow they're better off. I would also argue that's a misrepresentation about the way business operates. So Yeah, I just think that, I mean, if you read through the report, you would know that, well, I guess you guys did the right thing on 3.0. You made it based on net income, and that if someone, your expectation for business is that they break even and everything is fine. And I would say that is the flaw about the design of 3.0. So anyway, that is, yeah, that's my commentary on whether or not 3.0 is the same. It's not. And there are some things that are in common, and there are things that we need to follow up on, and we will.
Okay, I guess my final thought, thank you, Joan. My final thought, and you can stay on as well, is I just continue to have difficulty wrapping my arms around giving money out to people who suffer a revenue loss but don't suffer any loss in profits. And that seems to be the middle ground. And I don't know why it's so hard to design a program to do that. It sounds to me like, on one hand, Allison, Senator Clarkson, and I sort of left, we can't quite figure out this terminology used for .01, .02. What is the
Sorry.
word you're using?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look back,
What is the word? .0?
yeah,
What?
yeah, like 1.0 and 2.0. Sorry, it's probably my accent.
Oh, okay.
I think, if we go back into the records, like I think at one point the legislation did read operating, but that was changed to tax law. So it's why I'm a bit flummoxed by the question about what would you like us to change, because I think really this was designed, irrespective of what our preference or design idea was. So it's hard. It's hard for me to answer that question. Yeah, we went in with many different ideas, but that's not what came out.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what's going on here is there are two extremes. One is net tax loss and one is loss in revenue.
Right.
And we're trying to find
A middle
more
ground.
targeted middle
Yeah.
ground. And maybe it's not amenable to cookie cutter or simple applications, but anyhow, we'll wait for your memo on this, but we want to work with you to come up with something before we give up on $50 million going to other place.
Well,
Okay.
particularly just because we're all pretty aware of the few, and they may not be vast in number, but there are a few really key, particularly in the lodging industry, people in need still. And that that Becca is now back on. Becca and I were made very, and Joan made very aware of at that lodging conference. So it's, I really want to make sure, and it would be great if we could help them before we gather in January, if we could figure out a way within the construct we have. And that's what I think I'm frustrated by, is that we can't, what I would love a recommendation from you is within that construct, if we could figure out a way to do that.
It's tough.
Okay.
I mean, I think you've designed it. It's pretty much outlined in statute, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's frustrating.
Thank you, Joan.
Thanks.
Thanks.
David, if you're still here, David Hall.
Yes.
Hi, how are you feeling?
We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I'm okay.
Well, okay, well, I hope your situation improves, certainly. I wasn't really thinking of you today as a substantive witness, but I wanted you to hear this conversation both from Joan's perspective and the auditor's perspective, because I think there may be some drafting that needs to be done. But if you've heard anything to date that you want to alert us to, or at this point, certainly tell us. Otherwise, we'll move on to Doug.
I think I'm will defer to the auditor at this point. I'm happy to follow up with any of you if you have further needs.
Okay, thank you very much. Hope things go well the rest of the day. Auditor Hoffer, how are you?
You're muted.
Not anymore.
Well, that's good.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Thank you for being here. I would like to hear a 60,000-foot view of your report, but I'd like you to primarily focus on this new program, what you see as good, what you see as potential tweaks. You know that I am very much wanting to target the money to businesses that are really in need. There's a lot of economic development needs out there. I don't want to see money go out that could possibly go for housing or childcare, which businesses will benefit from as well. So there are a lot of different uses of this money. Yeah, so we have like $50,000 that the governor has on hold at this point, 50 million.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
50 million. And I'd like to see if there's something we can do with this particular program that would truly keep businesses in business, the ones that really need it.
Well, I share your concern, all of you. Thank you. And I can do both. I can respond to some of the commissioner's comments and give you some thoughts about the report. They tie together. Let me work backwards. I'm not a stenographer or a very fast typist, but the commissioner said that it was the auditor's preference that they use or should have used adjusted net operating income. It was also the view of the Joint Fiscal Office and the legislature's economists. So we're not alone in this. The commissioner also said that there's nothing at the moment that suggests non-compliance, but we can't answer that question, we being the state, unless and until the Agency of Commerce does a full review of those 401 businesses who, at least by our limited review, were paid $4.4 million more than the need they identified. And by the way, this is something I didn't know until just the other day, because I thought to ask my chief auditor to look into the records. For those folks who participated in or received awards from the agency in round one, the 401 out of 718, only 2 of those businesses subsequently applied for assistance in round 2. That's really telling, it seems to me, because notwithstanding the kind of unusual methodology in round 1, if they still had what the agency continued to define as unmet need based solely on revenue, then why wouldn't they apply in round 2? So for your consideration of unmet need going forward, I think it has been exaggerated, as we pointed out in the report, based on what we think is a reasonable approach, adjusted net operating income, and continues to be. The timing of the audit, the commissioner actually said she thought our report was misleading. I really take issue with that. An audit isn't open-ended. When you start, you look at a particular period of time. That's part of your scope of work. You can't look into the future. We looked at the records that were available. So I'm disappointed she characterized it that way. This question that you guys have discussed about the agency doing a second round of surveys to businesses, on the one hand, it's not inappropriate to ask people how a program could be better designed to meet their needs and so forth. But my goodness, everything they say is self-interested. They're looking to get the program redefined to serve them. And some of them may be like the folks that we found were more profitable than they were to begin with. And I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty certain that the legislature's intent was not to ensure the maintenance of profitability when you started. Now, the commissioner said, well, some people had $100,000 as a hypothetical, a profit in the prior year, and then they had $1. Well, that's kind of extreme, but even so, think of it this way. And this is an issue that you guys are deep in right now, unemployment. Except for the federal add-on of the $600, no worker who was adversely affected by this pandemic was guaranteed the same income they had the year before. When I say income, that's the equivalent of profit for businesses, because that's it. So I don't think that was your intent, to ensure the maintenance of profitability, whether it's less profitable, partly profitable, and so forth. That just struck me as odd. Senator Clarkson's comments, and I gather she attended the meeting with Senator Balint. this question about lodging is an interesting one. And if you want to go forward with this program in some form, I would encourage you to make every effort to target it as best as possible. And frankly, that was the JFO and Tom Cavett justification for their concern about the revenue approach as opposed to net operating income. The former is a blunt instrument, it's a shotgun, whereas the latter is much more narrowly focused. And that will help you, that should have, if it had been done, would have helped you guys ensure that those most in need would have gotten more money, as opposed to those who were already profitable and remain so. So I might encourage you, if you want to ask the agency to do another survey, that's fine. I would turn around and ask JFO and Tom Cavett to do some research about the available evidence from the tax department and BEA on what is the condition of the Vermont economy. Where are they lagging in the rebound from this terrible thing that we've been through? Because what you're hearing is from an agency who perceives its role as serving their client base. That's their job, but that's not objective in my view. You need some objective data. Furthermore, this question, this important question.
Doug, this is Senator Ballant. Can I just follow up on something you just said that I think was implied, but I just want to make it explicit. Are you saying that in relationship to the lodging industry, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if we had targeted it more carefully, they would have seen more relief?
No, I can't speak to the past. We didn't review the data by industry, although we have it. We could do some work in that regard. I'm saying if the problem still exists in a greater than average element for the lodging folks, then maybe that's where you all can target some more of this money instead of it being a broad brush to virtually anyone who hasn't gotten money yet. I thought that was an odd place to begin, but no, I'm sympathetic to the lodging folks. They're really at risk. But to a related question, which is about the labor market, to the extent that lots of businesses and nonprofits and others are struggling to fill vacant positions, I don't see how writing checks for profitable businesses is going to solve that problem. That's a problem that you guys can solve, because I looked into the guidance provided by the Treasury with regard to this latest tranche of the second $1 billion. And not only do you have a lot more time, 2 or 3 years to spend the money, which is critical, but you can spend it on all kinds of things. As Senator Sirotkin mentioned now several times, I'm a big supporter of not assuming that a proposal from any agency, not just Commerce, does not mean that that's the only option you have. You should always, in my view, consider all of the options and their likely or estimated return on investment. And there are a bunch of things you could do with that much money that would help the entirety of the Vermont economy, and not just the relatively small number of businesses that may not have received any ERG money yet. As for the report, as the commissioner acknowledged, there were 2 rounds that we reviewed. The first is the one that represents, in our view, a risk to the state. And the fact that the federal government, the Treasury, has not yet asked us to pay back some monies that may have exceeded the loss of businesses that received the awards doesn't mean that they can't or won't. Now, obviously, we all know that this will be a political fight royal. You can imagine senators and congresspersons from all over the country saying, why are you beating up my state? We made some mistakes, let's move on. We still have the pandemic, but they have made it very clear from the beginning, if you don't follow the rules, you're subject to recapture. We are required, my chief auditor reminded me, we are required by GAGAS standards, after we inform the administration, which we did with the report, of the areas where we think there's some outstanding risk, we have to tell the Office of the Inspector General of the Treasury of our findings. We're not asking them to beat us up, but we have to do it. Will they do it? That remains to be seen. But I think you and your colleagues should be prepared, at least those in the Appropriations Committee. You should be asking the agency to do this work. Now, the commissioner said they don't have the necessary information. It shouldn't be that hard. There's only 401 businesses, and you have quite a bit of time. So the other one was not a question of violating any federal or state rules. That was only a question, as was pointed out by JFO and Tom Cavett, of a design that wasn't optimal. And we just reported on what the results were when you compare the revenue version versus the net operating income version. And it was dramatic. And a lot of businesses that were quite profitable got money that arguably could have and should have gone to those in much more need. So that is intended to inform your decisions about what you do going forward. I hope it's helpful. I take no pleasure in this, frankly. So anyway, other questions if you have them.
Walk me through the process of what is the result of this report? Does it get a response from the agency? Are you expecting to more fully appear before our committee? This is, as you say, a point in time. If there has been mistakes and damage, it's done. This new program is not nearly as open as the past program. So what do you, what's the next steps for you, if any?
Well, first, as we do always with every GAGAS audit, we offer the auditee, in this case, the agency, the opportunity to respond in writing. And those management comments are appended to the report in their totality. And if we disagree with some of their comments, we get the last word and basically say, you said X, we say Y. And that is found at the very end of the report. In this case, I'm disappointed that the agency effectively ignored the substance of our findings and set out a different narrative, which was we acted as quickly as we could under the direction of the legislature and the federal government, and we got the money out the door. And that's what was required, and the program served its goals. Well, that's not what we audited. We didn't audit the decision to create the program. I don't think anybody would say otherwise. It was the appropriate thing to do. The only question was, how was it designed and how was it implemented? Those were the objectives, and that's what we did. As for follow-up by the feds, as I say, all we can do is send them the report, as we did to the fifth floor. And by the way, as I think you know, to those of you who had the time or took the time to read the report, this question about round one and the issue of the extent to which we may have paid businesses more than their need, which would have violated federal guidelines, the fifth floor itself commented on that and made the agency aware that they were concerned because, you know, the commissioner said, rightly, of course, that the award itself was based on 10% of the prior year's revenue. That's not the same as what their loss related to COVID was. And that's where the mismatch may have occurred. And I think it's pretty clear that it did. I mean, we looked at 11 businesses from that phase one group, which wasn't really, we weren't going to do that when we started the job, but we took a look. And, you know, half of them, whatever it was, 6 or 5, did not have a loss for the year, for the entire year, even though they reported, as was requested of them, a major decline for 1 month. A lot of businesses were able to recover. That doesn't mean that it's a pretty picture. It was terrible for almost everyone, but some did better than others. So that's the issue. And it's not, I don't want you guys to think that we just made this up. The fifth floor itself understood the risk involved in the approach they took. And I don't think the agency has responded yet, but one of our recommendations was that they look into all of those 401 businesses and determine for certain what the extent, if any, of the overage that was paid might be claimed by the federal government, and so that you guys can be prepared for that. And of course, she did say, and they did acknowledge that they would, look into those relatively few businesses that didn't meet the eligibility requirements in some cases, like tax standing and so forth, because also in the name of expediency, the agency did not check any of those self-attestations. Now, some of them were obviously less important than others. There's no question about it. Whether you're registered as a sole proprietor with the Secretary of State's office is not a big deal, but it was their criterion, not mine. But even the GAO made it very clear a long time ago, like a year ago, that, hey, to the world at large, we understand that this is an unusual time. It's a pandemic, for goodness sake. So anything you put together in terms of a program to spend federal dollars is probably not going to have the kind of oversight that you would under normal circumstances. Having said that, so there's more risk. Having said that, they were very clear in saying that doesn't mean you can walk away from your normal obligations in internal control and finance and management on the 4th floor, 5th floor, where the heck they are. They make it very clear, and I've referred to this in a number of our reports, that for those programs that depend in part on self-attestations, like Veggie, for example, and like these programs, the administration, through its agencies and departments, is obligated in terms of best practices to at least test some of those periodically to see if there are people who are taking advantage and telling untruths, as it were. So, and that wasn't done. And again, the commissioner would undoubtedly say it was a rush job. We had to get moving. There is some truth to that, but adding a week might not have made that much difference. So, it was a difficult time. You guys had to make tough decisions. The agency made tough decisions, but there were some signposts along the way that suggested opportunities to make more cost-effective choices. That's all.
May I ask a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Auditor Hoffer, based on your reviews, did you see specific cases in which there were material misstatements as far as self-attestations that should be brought to folks' attention?
Yeah, there were a few with regard to their assertions regarding how much they got, for example, from the SBA PPP program. It wasn't many, and I have no reason to think that the agency won't pursue those because they're pretty straightforward. Some didn't acknowledge the receipt of those funds at all, and some reported the wrong amount. So those, I think those would make
nature and amount.
Pardon me?
Were they significant in amount?
I don't think from your perspective, no. I think they're probably in the tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands, but I can check with Tanya about that.
Thank you.
So Auditor Hoffer, turning to the, what is it, .3? How does she express it?
Dotto.
Yeah, the program that's on our agenda. I remember last year, we tried and we worked collaboratively with the House to tighten it up, to target it to groups in need. I think I remember your testimony saying that we didn't go far enough. Now, looking at the results of 1 million out of $30 million being applied for, do you have any observations or opinion of whether we went too far or where we should have gone?
Well, for the former, I can't say. I don't have any data. The agency has the data and the responses from the companies, many of whom, as she indicated, did not apply for one of several reasons. Primarily, they didn't have a tax loss, or their operating income was, if not better, at least flat. I think I could be wrong, but I expect that that's partly what you intended. If a business was able, throughout all of that mess, to end up at this point in time standing on their feet without losses, I don't know how many businesses can say that. So the ones that don't have losses, I'm not sure why you would want to direct scarce resources to them, whether it's $1 profit or 100,000, when you can spend this money so many other ways. To the senator's comment earlier about lodging, that might be an opportunity for you guys to think more about targeting.
Right.
Well, I'm not unsympathetic. I mean, if there's a sole proprietor out there that made $100,000 a year pre-COVID and now is only making $25,000, I'm looking at that person saying they may fold up shop. Their business may go away. So I think the dollar loss is an exaggeration, but I mean, I just wish there was a way to run a program to say, we want to help those businesses that are in jeopardy of folding, but I don't know how you define it nicely so that you can run a ministerial program like that.
Well, that's why I suggested asking JFO and Cavet to dig into what's available, which is tax data, which is not full yet. Lots of businesses wait a while before they file, but ask them and see what they have to say from what's available.
So, Doug, do you think they would have that? I mean, as Joan has said, many businesses this year are waiting to file until October 15th. How quickly after that do you think we'd have the data that Tom Cavet could actually make use of? I just don't have a sense of that timing.
Yeah,
Certainly in
I don't
November.
either, but I can say that the tax department bought and installed a very sophisticated new IT system several years ago, which is light years better than
Right.
what they've had in the past. So I'd be
Right.
surprised, and call my former deputy, Andrew Stein, and ask him directly, how
Right.
quickly could you guys get this information to Quebec and the folks at JFO? And my guess is it would be pretty quick, because I'm hoping and expecting that a lot of these businesses submit their tax forms electronically. So I would
Oh,
hope
yeah.
at this late date that we're not talking about a lot of paper. That would slow things down, obviously.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Any further questions? Senator Ballard, anything more? No? Okay, that's been very helpful. We'll continue to keep you involved in any extension or revisions to this program, and we'll welcome your advice. Thank you.
I
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Well, thanks, Frank, for that report.
And Senator Brock, I'll try to get you that number.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Lucho. Yeah, and what time for Becca? Are we back on deck?
We're back at 1:30, so we have an hour and 5 minutes for lunch.
Great, and